Okay, now we'll talk how to actually win the game. As I've mentioned previously, once you start a certain map, what you need to do is you need to take a good look at the minimap and take a look at where the objectives are. Uh, they're currently marked as yellow circles, and these are airfields, but you can see this dark yellow is objective. So there are quite a few. So this one here, this one here, this one here, two here, and this one. Once you know where all the objectives are, you can start preparing on how to best reach them. You always have a time limit, so you will need to distribute forces in such a way as to reach the last objective in the least amount of time. This usually means that you need to create up 2 to 4 attack groups that will have their objectives assigned in such a way that they will all have, let's say, the same amount of difficulties to overcome. So it doesn't work well if you have one group that goes quickly and the other that takes twice as many turns, because you will likely outrun the time limit. So you need to balance it so that all groups finish their objectives at the same time. Sometimes this takes more than one try, so you can play them up, see where the main problems are, and maybe increase the group that has more difficult tasks, so give it more units, more air support, and such. Okay, but as I said, first you need to sort of like distribute all the units that you have into a certain attack groups. In this case, we see that we have one objective that is very separated from the rest. Also, this one here is quite far away. So in this case, it will be let's say a bit non-specific, so we will first start with, say, 3 axes of advance, meaning you will attack 3 points in the enemy defense, but once you've broken through those, you will likely need to distribute your units in something like 6 attack groups and attack all the towns separately. So one group will likely attack this town and this town, because it will probably take too much time to attack this town, then this town. It will likely be too far, because as you can see, these objectives are pretty close, so you will reach them much sooner than passing through all this. So what you will need to do is you will need to take this town and this town with one group, and then have another group that will maybe take this and this. And also you will need one group to take either just one town, or maybe one large group that will split and take one and the other. And of course you will need one group just to take this one. This town is very well defended behind Maginot Line, so and forces here are very weak, so it will take a very long time to penetrate the Maginot Line and take the town. This is what I've mentioned, that you need to sometimes play one map more than once and adjust your tactics. Okay, so once we've established that we need to penetrate the line, I wanted to add to this one more thing. I've already actually said it, but just to give it a name. Once you start playing this map, you will notice that French line of defense is spread across the entire map. So you have basically one almost continuous line of defense stretching from the Channel or La Manche to the Swiss border. And of course, Maginot Line is very strong here, and this is the, let's say, there are no fortifications in this part, but all the French reserves are in this part, so this line of defense is very well defended. This was the same historically. Germans basically didn't move for the first 2 weeks when attacking. Afterwards, it was much easier. This map was done to reflect this, so most of the French units are on the first line of defense, and attacking it will be hard. So as I mentioned, there is one long line of defense, and basically you are pretty balanced with the French. You are slightly stronger, but you can't afford to waste units by attacking in all places at once. This tactics that takes one point, puts a lot of force into that one point, breaks through it, and then all the units pour through that breakthrough. This is called Schwerepunkt, so place where your hardest attack will fall. So basically you need to find a few of those and move all the units through those points and attack only those points, and not equally distributed among the entire line, because that will be like World War I, and we all know that all the nations that fought in World War I got out of it scarred, and with firm determination never to repeat something like that again. This is why historically blitzkrieg tactics was developed. What's interesting is that actually blitzkrieg tactics comes from some German tactics that was used even at the end of the World War I. But let's get back to how to actually implement it. So we said that what we need to attack, and basically when you take a look at your units, you see that it calls to you just to attack evenly across this whole length, but you need to fight that urge. You need to select a few points and attack them. So in this case, this part is pretty good, because this part is on the river, and units when crossing river get enormous defense penalties and suffer enormous losses. AI knows this and exploits this, so this is not the way to go. Also, this point here will provide a good passage without rivers. Of course, defender knows this, so these 2 points are very well defended, but if you Schwerepunkt, you will be able to pass through. Another part where you need to decide what to do is how to take this town. Theoretically, you could, just penetrate here and approach it from the back, but then these units would be useless because it would take too much time to transport them here. So what you will do, you will have to pick, one other Schwerpunkt somewhere here, and penetrate and attack town. So basically, I've played this map for quite a few times, so I know that this tactics works. So as I said, one is here, and I've selected this poor bunker to be my Schwerpunkt in Maginot Line. So next thing that you need to do is prepare your attack. So the game itself is called Klotzen. It comes from the saying Klotzen nicht kleckern, and that means basically you need to strike with one hard blow and not with many weak blows. Why? Because if you strike with weak blows, you will get exhausted, enemy will get exhausted, but enemy will get the chance to recover. If you strike with overwhelming force, you will be able to not only damage enemy units, but completely destroy them, and they will not get a chance to repair themselves, reinforce themselves and such. and this will give you opportunity to decisively finish the campaign. Okay, let's put all that into practice now. One thing that you need to understand is that although you are with the time limit, all the maps are winnable, and the worst thing that you can actually do is rush. So your attacks need to be prepared. You will notice that all units have a defense bonus when they spend a few turns in a certain terrain. This defense bonus is pretty large, very influential on the combat results, and you need to reduce it by attacking. So historically, and even today, if you have a lot of infantry, if you attack bunkers without artillery support, your units will simply get slaughtered without doing anything. So what you need to do is you need to first bomb for a few turns, reduce the defense, and then attack with your ground troops. Before, of course, you need to understand where the enemy is. So you can start with the visible units. So this unit is visible. You can guess that there are other units here, but you can, for example, call bomber by pressing B and fly over the enemy unit. Okay, you can now see that it's a very well prepared position. Keep in mind that when you are attacking a unit, if there is artillery adjacent to it, it will fire first. So a combat will not start. First, artillery will fire at your unit, and then the actual combat between your unit and the enemy unit will start. So basically, this will turn into a massacre because artillery, although it doesn't damage your units that much, it causes scatter, meaning that part of the unit gets scared and scattered and doesn't participate in attack, and this is pretty large number. So basically, if you have a unit with a strength of say 10, artillery can very well scatter 4 or 6 and only 4 will fight, and then of course defender will also fire and it will turn into a massacre and wasted unit strength. So what you need to do is like I said, let's switch to ground view for a second. So you can see that here you can see that enemy defense is 7. That means that if say your attack is 8 and the enemy defense is 8, they get +7, that is 8 against 15, so your units will probably do nothing. Add to this artillery, if you just attack without preparation, you will do nothing, end up losing. So as I mentioned, you first scout a bit, then you pick a plane, you bomb the enemy unit, and hopefully defense gets reduced. It got reduced by 1, so we will need to repeat this. As I said, don't rush it. When you are attacking a prepared defensive positions, take a few turns to break them without panicking. So that's one thing. Another thing that you need to do, you need to take care of this cannon. If you want to disable it for one turn, use bombers. If you want to kill it for the next turn, use tactical bombers. So we'll press T. Okay, we got tactical bombers selected. We press where we want it to fly, and we bomb. So as you can see, we dealt 4 damage. So that's pretty good. In the next turn it will be much easier to attack. Next thing that you can do, you can approach with your units. You can either use tanks or infantry. Tanks are great if you don't plan on attacking this turn, because they have a high defense, so they are very good to have them as sort of like a iron wall that protects other units until they approach. This is especially true for cannon, which have a very low defense and are expensive, so they're favorite targets of the AI. So let's first put some tanks as a protection. Okay, one other thing that you need to see is once we've approached the unit, we've noticed the minefield here. Minefields are extremely nasty. So basically, when you are attacking the unit behind the minefield, you first need to attack minefield, which also kills part of your unit, and only after the minefield is cleared, which can take a few turns, roughly every third turn or a third attack will clear the minefield, only after that will you be able to attack the unit. So as I said, these are very well prepared positions. Take your time. Okay, so another thing that we can do, we can approach the enemy here, another minefield, so also we can approach here. We have another minefield, but we've noticed that there isn't a minefield here. So we will still not attack, because as you can see, expected losses are 0, which can easily turn into a few parts of the unit killed for us. So for now, just prepare the attack, move artillery into range. It has a range of 2, so fire. You can see that it didn't kill anything, but if we hover over unit, it still has a defense of 6, so nothing happened. It's a chance based. So next we can put a tank here, move infantry out of position, put artillery here, fire, and hope that it will, yes, it reduced the defense to 5. So this is the way to go, and as you've noticed, I'm attacking one unit only. In this case we will need to clear all 3 before we can pass, and this unit is pretty vulnerable to tactical bombers, so we'll call another tactical bomber. We didn't do that much damage, but in a few turns it will get better. And also usually don't forget, in a few first turns, when playing with Germans, you usually have air superiority, so meaning better fighters, more fighters, and more experienced fighters. So enemy fighters will only usually be problem in a few first turns, and in those turns you absolutely need to protect your bombers. So in this case, call a fighter here and just protect them. It sometimes is a good idea if you expect more enemy fighters to put a double fighter protection, because there are quite a few bombers here. Okay, so that was one Schwerepunkt. Another Schwerepunkt is this. I will not show how to do it. I think you are getting the understanding. You will notice, I will just show you one more thing. Let's go with the fighter first. Okay, so you will notice that there is artillery here, so you would want to attack it with the bomber. However, this artillery is protected by AI gun. I know it's a bit tedious, but you will get the feeling of how it was in World War II. So as I said, these are prepared defenses, so you can expect for enemy to be well prepared in logical positions, and all units will likely be well defended. You will need to observe the situation carefully to find say ground units that are not defended by AA guns, for example. This is the good example of that. Or you will simply need to do it by brute force. Sometimes you will need to do stupid attacks with high losses, in one place, sacrifice a few units, to achieve a breakthrough, and then after you've achieved it, once you cracked it in one place, it gets much easier. So this is how it will work here. In this case, you will simply need to ignore the AA gun, so you can either try to suppress it with the bomber or just ignore it completely. In this case, let's suppress it. So we attack AA gun, which is never a good idea. As you can see, our plane did 2 scatters, so that gun will only fire with strength of 8. So we can now more easily attack with the tactical bomber. So as you can see, our bomber performed pretty well. Okay, so this is basically how to approach Schwerepunkts. One other thing is just to show this Schwerepunkting in a bit more detail. As I said previously, this group is pretty weak. When you take a look, there are minefields everywhere. There are forts. Forts are like very strong cannons, so they support neighboring units. So this will be a pretty hard affair. So what you need to do is you need to have a lot of artillery to dig up this bunker. So you see that this hex has a lot of minefields, so this will be pretty hard. So what you need to do, you need to pull other units to help. So you have 2 cannons here. Okay, this one got stuck in a zone of control. I should have checked that one, but basically this is how you go. This unit is interesting. So these are pioneers. Pioneers have bonuses against fortifications because they used historically shaped charges, which are very powerful and very concentrated explosives that are made for penetrating thick walls. So there was example in World War II. I think it was one of the forts here. Basically, Germans attacked it and fired a smoke screen and lots of shells, and one pioneer sneaked into the fort on the top of the fort, put one shaped charge on this cupola. Here cupola exploded, and that is jumped out of its base, and there was an opening. He threw another shaped charge inside, ran away, and this created a chain reaction when shells that were stored in that cupola started exploding. Fire started spreading, and fire is very nasty in bunkers because it sort of like spreads through tunnels, the same as fire spreads through cannon, when the shell is fired, so it doesn't lose strength when when coming the distance. So basically, long story short, the entire fort got destroyed by actually one shaped charge. Everybody died in the fort. So pioneers, as mentioned, have bonuses to attack, but first you need to clear minefields. I recommend, of course, using the cheaper regular infantry to clear the minefields first, and of course do artillery preparation beforehand, and then concentrate on just one hex, and then pass through here to attack the town. Okay, I will not show you the entire battle. That would take too long, but I wanted to show you what happens once you break through the lines. As I mentioned, in this map, the French line was only strong at the beginning, and there was practically no forces behind that. So this was actually a very slow moving. As you see, it's now turn 9. And I've only just advanced for say 1 or 2 full turns from the starting positions. So it was a very slow affair. But once I've broken through this, there's only a weak line after that, and you can see those attack axes, taking shape. So as you see, we have one battle group here. That group will clear this town with support of planes and attack this one. Also, you have this group here. They will attack this town and then move here. So as you can see, this will probably take the same amount of turns, right? So for this group to take these two towns and for this group to take this town. And also we have another group that is pretty strong, because after taking this weakly defended town, they will need to take these two towns. So they will, after taking this town, they will split in two. One group will attack one town and the other group the another town. To save time, I recommend using bombers to reduce the defense bonus of the units defending it before your units reach it. Also, as you can see, we finally broke through here. As you can see, we only have 3 hexes gap wide, 3 hexes wide, because it's Maginot Line and it was really hard to penetrate. So once we are through it, we swing and attack this town. So this will happen in next few turns. So like I said, concentrate, Schwerepunkt, and then divide your units into battle groups. Battle groups, if you are wondering, are just a group of units that work well together. Historically, units were divided into divisions, and each division was capable of independent operations, meaning each division had anti-tank component, they had anti-aircraft component, they had artillery, infantry. If they were panzer divisions, that is armored divisions, they had tanks as well. So basically everything that was needed for, they had recon, so everything that was needed was in one division. In this case, we pretend that units are brigades, which means that each unit is specialized with something, and you need to provide, if you have infantry, you need to provide them with anti-tank support. That is a separate unit. If there are plenty planes, you need to either give them fighter cover, or provide them with anti-aircraft support, like for example this French infantry here. So basically you need to combine different units to work as a team. So that's combined arms tactics, and every unit is specialized for something. For example, tanks have a high armor, so they are very good at blocking, taking damage. And they are very fast. They are tracked, meaning that they can move through any terrain. You would say they are a perfect unit. However, they have two major drawbacks. First, the price. They're extremely expensive, so you can't, have an all tank army. Second major thing with them is they're extremely big, and they're extremely big, so they can't take towns, move through forests and such. They also do a lot of damage to all ground units, so you would say that it's a perfect unit. However, there are two major drawbacks. First, they are extremely expensive, and the other thing is they are big and unwieldy, meaning that they can move in open terrain freely, but in any closed terrain they are in problems. So if you imagine, tanks in flat terrain against infantry and tanks in wooded hills against infantry, infantry will be much it will be much easier for infantry to sneak up on tanks and disable them in woody terrain. So for this reason, tanks receive large defense penalty and attack penalty in closed terrains. By closed terrains, I mean pretty much everything that is not plains, so towns and such. I've already covered this. Also, for these same reasons, infantry performs extremely well in closed terrains and pretty poorly in open terrains. So infantry is vulnerable, but is also cheap. So good army composition consists from both tanks, infantry, and artillery to support attacks in closed terrains and on entrenched positions. So this is the heart of the combined arms tactics. So you have planes to block enemy movement and to soften up the critical areas of the battlefield. You have artillery to prepare attack on defended positions, infantry to defend any closed terrains, and tanks to attack units that are in the open and exploit any breakthroughs that you perform with artillery, infantry, and tanks. Okay, let's take a look at the classes in Klotzen. Ground classes are shown here. So you have infantry. We've covered their strengths and weaknesses. So they are basically cheap and good in closed terrain. Tank is the exact opposite, expensive, maneuverable, and good both for protection and attack in open terrains. You have artillery, very vulnerable, slow. You need to load them into trucks that are extremely vulnerable, and basically you need to take care of them with tanks and infantry. Always protect them because enemy will target them, but they are essential to breaking through defensive lines, and you will encounter a lot of those. Tank hunters are currently pretty limited. But they are specialized in hunting tanks, meaning they are either more well armored or much cheaper than tanks, but are pretty useless against anything else. Also, you have anti-tank guns. Those are pretty much the same as tank hunters, only immobile, so you need to transport them around with trucks. You have a recon units that are very maneuverable, but light and almost useless in combat, but they have a high view range and are very useful when advancing quickly to have a good situation awareness. You also have anti-aircraft guns. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory, I think. So any unit that is around the anti-aircraft gun is protected by it. So if it gets attacked, first anti-aircraft gun fires. It also does mostly scatter damage, but that also means that any units around a gun will survive. And lastly, we have armored trains. They had negligible impact on war, but are inserted here for historical reasons. We also have air units. Air units are split into fighters, tactical bombers, and bombers. Fighters are understandable. They are used for fighting other planes, either enemy fighters for air superiority or killing enemy bombers. They also work as AA, so if you have fighter around any ground unit, they will intercept any air attack on it. And also if they're next to bombers or tactical bombers, any attack on those by enemy fighters will provoke the counterfire by your fighters first. So those are fighters. We have tactical bombers. Tactical bombers are, let's say, a bit larger fighters with bombs usually, and they are of course vulnerable to fighters, but they are quite small, maneuverable, and they can bomb with pinpoint accuracy. So they are mostly used for point targets like bridges or enemy tanks, cannons, so anything that you need to precisely hit. You also have bombers. They are mostly used for carpet bombing. So from high up, they just throw a lot of bombs and hope that they will hit something. They do a lot of scatter damage, and they are pretty resistant to anti-aircraft guns fire. Anti-aircraft guns are actually split into light and heavy. Light anti-aircraft guns are good against fighters and tactical bombers, and heavy anti-aircraft guns are mostly used against high flying bombers. So here you can see these larger guns are for against bombers, and these low caliber guns are for tactical and fighters. They both can fire at any plane, of course, but they are more effective against planes they're designed for. So this is it. There are also naval combat. We will cover that next. Okay, as you can see, for naval combat we will pick a map that is naval, that is, for example, German invasion on Norway. For the naval classes, you can see them here. So we have a battleship. So this is basically a ship designed to destroy other ships. It's one of the greatest and heaviest ships with high armor and large guns. For example, battleships have twice the displacement of the heavy cruisers and 8 times the firepower. So clearly those are designed for killing enemy ships. You also have a heavy cruiser. Heavy cruiser is a ship designed either to also hunt other lighter ships or protect your fleets. It's sort of like a jack of all trades. It can also do convoy escort, raiding of other enemy convoys and such. Next we have light cruisers. Light cruisers are also jack of all trades, so they hunt enemy destroyers, they protect convoys, they can provide air cover, so they're pretty multi task. Next we have destroyers. Destroyers are very light. For example, displacement of 20 destroyers is roughly equivalent to one battleship or even more. They have torpedoes that are short-ranged but extremely powerful. They're used for convoy escort, hunting enemy submarines, fighting other destroyers, and the like. Also air cover, meaning protecting other ships with anti-aircraft guns and the like. They are cheap, maneuverable, hard to hit, so they always appear in great numbers. And last we have submarines. Submarines are extremely slow but invisible to most ships. Basically only destroyers can attack them. They have a devastating torpedo attack, so they're ship killers, extremely cheap, extremely deadly for large ships. So they are deployed in large numbers, and then sort of like they are almost like spiders of the ships. They sit in one place, moving very little, and just wait for the ships to approach them. They are mostly used for merchant shipping, because most of the enemy surface ships are quite fast and hard to hit with a torpedo. but they have been known to sink quite a few ships by just by quantity alone. So how does it all play together? When playing campaign, you will play only as German, which means that you will be going against allies that are much stronger in the surface ships against you. So you will have to help your fleet to win. So you do this in two ways, either by using your submarines well, or by supplementing your fleet with bombers. Bombers are very good against ships, as was historically shown, and 200 planes can sink pretty much any ship, and historically that was quite common to happen. If one combatant had air superiority, which was also very often. So basically, this was what happened in Norway. So Germany had a lot of planes. It had air superiority. So naval operations were pretty dangerous for allies. But due to partly bad weather, they managed to pull that campaign off without any heavier losses due to air attacks. So how to play as a German? I guess you need to understand that your two main strengths are air superiority and submarines. Since submarines can be only attacked by destroyers, use your ships and planes to sink enemy destroyers, and then use submarines to sink enemy ships. Any other tactics will likely result in heavy losses to your surface fleet, because you are basically outgunned.